The line between human territory and wilderness is often drawn with fences and fear, but for the Mason family, that boundary had always been more of a gentle suggestion than a hard rule. Nestled at the edge of Whispering Pines Forest, their small wooden home stood as a bridge between two worlds, where the sounds of civilization gradually gave way to the ancient rhythm of nature. It was a morning unlike any other when fate decided to test the fragile harmony they had built with their wild neighbors. The sun had barely crept over the eastern ridge, painting the sky in strokes of amber and gold, when the first unusual signs appeared. The birds, typically a chorus of morning melodies, had fallen silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself was waiting for something momentous to unfold. The Masons were a young family of three. Michael, a wildlife photographer whose gentle eyes had documented the secret lives of forest creatures for over a decade. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, whose lessons often featured the wisdom of the natural world. And their miracle, 15-month-old Emma, whose innocent curiosity matched the wilderness that surrounded their home. For 3 years, they had lived in respectful coexistence with the creatures of Whispering Pines. They had witnessed the seasonal parade of wildlife from their porch. Deer would cautiously graze at the meadow's edge as the family ate breakfast. Foxes occasionally peered from behind fallen logs, studying these strange two-legged neighbors. And yes, they knew of the bears, particularly the large female black bear they affectionately called Willow. Recognizable by the distinctive white patch on her chest, who roamed the hills behind their property with her cubs each spring. The Masons had established unspoken boundaries with their wild neighbors. Never feed them. Always maintain distance. Respect their space. These simple rules had fostered a rare harmony that few humans ever experience with the untamed world. But nothing in their peaceful coexistence could have prepared them for the heart-wrenching test of compassion that awaited them just beyond the tree line that fateful morning. Michael had ventured into the forest that morning to capture the first light filtering through the autumn leaves. Camera in hand, he followed a familiar trail that wound deeper into the woods, his footsteps muffled by the carpet of fallen pine needles. The strange silence that had settled over the forest grew more pronounced with each step, raising the hairs on the back of his neck. 20 years of wilderness experience had taught him to recognize when something was amiss in nature's carefully balanced world. He paused at a small clearing to adjust his lens when a faint sound carried through the still air. Not the rustling of leaves or the call of a bird, but something more primal, a low, pained moan that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. Michael lowered his camera, his senses suddenly alert to the distress call that no wildlife photographer ever wishes to hear. Following the sound, he pushed through a dense thicket of brambles, his heart pounding against his ribs. What he discovered in the small hollow beyond stole the breath from his lungs and froze him in place. There, bound cruelly to an ancient oak, was a large black bear with a distinctive white patch on her chest. Willow. Thick rope cut into her fur, wound tightly around her body and the massive trunk, allowing barely enough movement to stand. Evidence of her desperate struggle was carved into the earth beneath her paws. Dark blood matted the fur where the ropes had worn through to skin. Her once powerful frame appeared diminished, ribs visible beneath her dulled coat. How long had she been trapped here? Days, perhaps. Around the tree lay the telltale signs of poachers, discarded cigarette butts, empty beer cans, a rusted trap lying nearby, thankfully unsprung. These weren't hunters seeking food for survival, but cruel opportunists targeting bears for their parts. Most heartbreaking of all were the small paw prints in the soft mud surrounding the tree. Cubs had been here, circling their mother in confusion and fear. But the prints told a story of departure. Some led away into the forest, while others showed signs of having been trampled by human boots. Michael's experienced eyes tracked the scene with growing horror as he pieced together what had happened. Willow had cubs, likely two based on the varied paw sizes. At least one had escaped into the forest, but the other. Michael swallowed hard, his photographer's detachment crumbling in the face of such calculated cruelty. Willow's eyes, pools of pain and exhaustion, fixed on him with an intelligence that transcended the barrier between their species. In that gaze, he saw not just suffering, but a plea more eloquent than any human words. Michael burst back into their small woodland home, breathless and visibly shaken. Sarah immediately sensed something was wrong as she fed their 15-month-old Emma her breakfast. The urgency in his eyes prompted her to quickly settle their daughter in her playpen with toys before joining her husband on the porch to hear his disturbing discovery. The revelation about Willow's dire situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The thought of the familiar black bear who had peacefully coexisted near their home now suffering at the hands of poachers, bound cruelly to a tree, dehydrated and injured, with at least one cub missing, filled her with both sorrow and righteous anger. Their immediate instinct was to help, but helping a wild animal, especially a bear in distress, presented serious dangers they couldn't ignore. Michael had already attempted to contact the wildlife authorities, but the remote location of their home meant no cell service was available. The nearest town was 40 minutes away, and waiting for official help to arrive after such a journey might come too late for the suffering animal. Yet approaching a frightened, injured bear themselves carried obvious risks that responsible parents couldn't take lightly. They weighed their options in tense silence. Michael paced the weathered porch while Sarah leaned against the railing, her mind methodically analyzing each possible approach. The sounds of Emma's contented babbling from inside the house served as a sobering reminder of their most important responsibility. The ethical dilemma pressed heavily upon them. Every minute they deliberated was another minute Willow suffered. Yet rushing in without a plan could end in tragedy. Sarah contemplated the bear's deteriorating condition against the potential danger to her family. Michael considered his experience with wildlife and whether it would be enough to safely approach a desperate animal. After several minutes of quiet discussion, they reached a compromise between compassion and caution. They would go together as a family, with Sarah keeping Emma at a safe distance while Michael approached Willow with water. They would bring their emergency satellite phone to call for professional help from the site itself, ensuring assistance would reach the exact location without delay. With their decision made, a sense of purpose replaced their uncertainty. Michael gathered the satellite phone and first aid supplies while Sarah prepared water bottles in the baby carrier. Neither spoke of the fear that lingered beneath their determination, but both felt the weight of what awaited them in the forest ahead. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the Mason family made their careful approach to the clearing. Michael led the way, carrying water and supplies, while Sarah followed several paces behind, with Emma secured in her carrier. They moved with deliberate slowness, each step measured against the gravity of what awaited them. Upon reaching the hollow where Willow remained bound, Michael gestured for Sarah to stay back with Emma. The sight that greeted them was even more distressing than before. In the hours since Michael's discovery, Willow's condition had visibly deteriorated. Her massive head hung lower now, her breathing labored and irregular. The ground beneath her showed fresh signs of struggle, the earth torn by desperate claws seeking freedom. A profound exhaustion emanated from her powerful frame, the fight slowly draining from her spirit. Michael used the satellite phone to call the wildlife rescue authorities, his voice tight with controlled urgency as he described the situation and provided their coordinates. The response was not what he had hoped. Due to a forest fire in the next county, most of the wildlife personnel had been deployed there. They promised to send someone as soon as possible, but it would be at least 3 hours before help could arrive. 3 hours that Willow might not have. With the sun climbing higher, the temperature in the clearing rose steadily. Flies had begun to gather around the bear's wounds, adding misery to her already pitiful state. Michael cautiously approached with water, speaking in soft, constant tones as he had done with injured wildlife in the past. He poured water into a shallow depression in the earth near her muzzle, close enough for her to drink without requiring her to move her bound body. It was then that something extraordinary happened. As Willow became aware of their presence, her behavior shifted in a way neither Michael nor Sarah had expected. Instead of displaying fear or aggression toward the humans, her eyes tracked beyond Michael to where Sarah stood with Emma. The bear's gaze fixed intently on the baby, and a series of soft, rumbling sounds emanated from deep in her chest. Sarah instinctively tightened her hold on Emma, maternal protectiveness surging through her veins. But the bear's demeanor conveyed not threat, but something far more complex. Willow strained against her bindings, not in an attempt to break free, but as if trying to communicate. Her eyes never left the child, and her vocalizations took on an almost plaintive quality. Michael and Sarah exchanged bewildered glances. In all their experience with woodland creatures, they had never witnessed anything like this. It was as if Willow recognized something in the human child that transcended the natural boundaries between their species, a connection forged in the universal language of motherhood and vulnerability. As the minutes stretched into an hour, Michael worked diligently to ease Willow's suffering without risking too close an approach. He fashioned a long stick with a water-soaked cloth at its end, allowing the bear to moisten her parched tongue from a safe distance. Meanwhile, Sarah remained vigilant with Emma at the agreed-upon safety boundary, speaking softly to their daughter about the importance of helping animals in need. Emma, however, was entering that magical age where curiosity outweighed caution. The strange sounds coming from the clearing held an irresistible allure for her developing mind. She watched the unfolding scene with widening eyes, absorbing every detail with the innocent intensity that only children possess. The bear's occasional low moans seemed to particularly capture her attention, her small head tilting in response to each sound. The satellite phone chirped unexpectedly, with an incoming message from the wildlife authorities requesting further details about the bear's condition. The sudden sound startled both parents, momentarily drawing their complete attention. Michael turned away to respond, describing Willow's wounds in deteriorating state, while Sarah glanced down to check the message on the small screen. It was only a matter of seconds, that brief window of distraction, but it was enough. Emma, who had recently mastered the art of wriggling free from constraints, somehow managed to loosen the straps of her carrier. With the remarkable speed of a toddler on a mission, she slid down from Sarah's hold and took her first tottering steps toward the clearing before either parent realized what was happening. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she looked up to find Emma several feet away, wobbling determinedly toward the bound bear. Before she could call out or lunge forward, the atmosphere in the clearing underwent a profound transformation. Willow, sensing the approaching child, became absolutely still. Her earlier distress calls ceased completely. The wild panic in her eyes gave way to something entirely different, a focused attention that held neither threat nor fear. She lowered her massive head to the ground in a posture that seemed almost submissive, her gaze never leaving the small human making her unsteady approach. The bound bear's body language shifted in ways that Michael, with all his wildlife experience, had never witnessed before. The tension in her powerful muscles relaxed, and a series of soft, huffing sounds, not unlike the gentle rumbles a mother bear uses to call her cubs, emerged from her throat. It was as if Willow somehow recognized the innocence approaching her, a young life as vulnerable in its way as her own missing cubs. Time seemed to slow in the forest clearing as Emma continued her unsteady journey toward Willow. Michael and Sarah remained frozen in place, caught between the instinct to rush forward and snatch their child away, and some deeper understanding that interrupting this moment might trigger the very danger they feared. Years of respecting wildlife had taught them to read animal behavior, and everything about Willow's current demeanor contradicted what they knew about threatened bears. The massive creature, despite her pain and fear, extended her snout toward Emma in a gesture that could only be described as supplication. Soft whimpering sounds emerged from her throat, reminiscent of the sounds bears make when communicating distress to their own kind. Her eyes, intelligent and soulful, held a desperate plea that transcended species barriers. With great effort, she lifted one paw slightly off the ground, then placed it back down, repeating this motion in what appeared to be a beckoning gesture. Emma stopped just beyond the reach of the bear, her tiny face solemn with concentration. Unlike adults with their learned fears, she approached this moment with the pure openness of childhood. Something in the bear's distress called to her in a language more ancient than words, a primal connection between two vulnerable beings. The toddler tilted her head, studying the ropes cutting into Willow's fur, the matted blood on her coat, the exhaustion evident in every line of the great animal's body. Her small features scrunched in what appeared to be deep thought, an expression her parents recognized from when she encountered something that confused or troubled her, developing sense of how the world should be. What happened next would remain etched in the memories of both parents for the rest of their lives. Emma, with the innocent wisdom that sometimes seems gifted to the very young, did not cry or turn away from the suffering before her. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her small overalls where Sarah had placed a small snack earlier that morning. With deliberate care, she pulled out a partially squished blueberry and extended it toward the bear in a universal gesture of offering comfort. The simple act contained a profound compassion that struck Michael and Sarah to their cores. Their child, barely able to form complete sentences, had intuitively understood what the bear needed most in that moment. Not just physical help, but acknowledgement of her pain, recognition of her plight, the simple dignity of being seen in her suffering. Willow's response was equally extraordinary. Rather than showing interest in the food, she lowered her head further, continuing those soft, imploring sounds. Her eyes never left Emma's face, communicating something urgent beyond the immediate circumstances of her captivity. The clearing had become a stage for something extraordinary, a moment suspended between breaths where the usual rules of the natural world seemed temporarily suspended. Emma stood before the massive bear, her tiny frame dwarfed by Willow's powerful presence. The blueberry offering remained extended in her small hand, a gesture so pure in its intention that it seemed to hold the attention of the forest itself. When Willow did not take the berry, Emma took another tentative step forward. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp, while Michael's muscles tensed, ready to spring forward at the first sign of danger. But something in Willow's demeanor kept them rooted in place, witnesses to something they could not fully comprehend but instinctively knew was important. Emma carefully placed the blueberry on the ground before the bear's muzzle, then straightened up with the deliberate movements of a child focusing intently on a task. What she did next left her parents speechless with astonishment. The toddler reached out her small hand toward the ropes binding Willow to the tree, her fingers brushing against the coarse fibers. With a determination that belied her tender age, she began pulling at the knots, making soft sounds of frustration when her limited strength proved inadequate to the task. It was as if she somehow understood exactly what was wrong in this picture and had decided with the straightforward logic of childhood to simply fix it. No fear, no hesitation, just the clear certainty that the bear should not be tied up and that she had the power to help. Tears streamed unchecked down Sarah's face as she watched her daughter attempt this impossible task. Michael felt something break open within his chest, a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed him of breath. The simplicity of Emma's response to suffering cut through all the adult complications and considerations that had governed their own approach. Where they had seen danger and complexity, she saw only a creature in need. Most remarkable of all was Willow's response. The great bear remained perfectly still, watching the child's efforts with an almost reverent attention. When Emma's small fingers became tangled in the rope, Willow shifted her body slightly to make the child's task easier, moving with exquisite gentleness despite her own pain. This profound moment of trust between predator and child, this impossible connection across species lines, transformed something fundamental in how the Masons understood their role in this rescue. What had begun as a careful intervention, governed by fear and caution, now shifted into something else entirely. The bear was no longer just a dangerous wild animal requiring professional handling, but a sentient being capable of understanding and cooperation. A mother separated from her young who recognized that same maternal bond in the humans before her. Michael approached slowly, joining his daughter in her efforts while Sarah moved closer as well. The family unit now working together in a new synchronized purpose. The initial plan of simply providing water until authorities arrived expanded into a more immediate mission. They would free Willow themselves, guided by the trust that Emma had somehow established between human and bear. The sun had reached its zenith when the distant sound of vehicles broke through the forest quiet. The wildlife rescue team had arrived sooner than expected, alerted by the urgency in Michael's voice during their earlier communication. Two trucks bearing the Forest Service emblem pulled up at the edge of the access road, and four uniformed experts emerged with tranquilizer guns and rescue equipment in hand. Dr. Eleanor Wright, the senior wildlife veterinarian, approached the clearing first, then stopped abruptly at the unexpected tableau before her. Her years of experience had prepared her for many scenarios, but not for the sight of a family working methodically near a fully conscious adult black bear. Even more astonishing was the toddler seated just feet from the animal, babbling softly as if in conversation with the massive predator. The rescue team instinctively raised their tranquilizer guns, following standard protocol for bear encounters. But Michael quickly motioned for them to lower their weapons. In hushed tones, he explained the extraordinary events that had unfolded, how Emma had somehow established a unique connection with the suffering animal, and how Willow had responded with unexpected gentleness and trust. Dr. Wright observed the scene with professional skepticism that gradually gave way to wonder. The bear's behavior defied conventional wildlife management understanding. Instead of displaying stress or aggression at the approach of multiple humans, Willow remained calm, her eyes frequently seeking out the small child as if drawing reassurance from her presence. In 30 years of wildlife rescue, I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Wright whispered, her experienced gaze assessing Willow's condition. She's severely dehydrated, wounded from the ropes, and likely starving, yet she's allowing this close contact. The traditional rescue approach would have involved sedating the bear immediately, but Dr. Wright made an unprecedented decision. Taking cues from Emma's gentle approach, she instructed her team to proceed without tranquilizers, using only mild sedatives administered via food to take the edge off Willow's pain while leaving her conscious. The team worked methodically to cut through the ropes binding Willow to the tree, moving with deliberate slowness and constantly talking in soft, reassuring tones. Emma remained nearby, seated in Sarah's lap at a slightly safer distance, serving as a focal point for the bear's attention. Whenever Willow showed signs of distress, Emma would babble or wave a small hand, seemingly distracting the bear from the discomfort of the rescue efforts. As the last rope fell away, a collective breath was held. Willow, free for the first time in days, wobbled unsteadily on weakened legs. The moment was fragile, balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. Then, instead of bolting into the forest or lashing out in fear, she simply sat down heavily, too exhausted to move further, her intelligent eyes still fixed on the small human child who had somehow recognized her plight. In the days following Willow's rescue, an intensive search operation commenced for her missing cubs. Wildlife officers, community volunteers, and the Masons themselves combed the forest thoroughly. One cub was quickly found hiding in a hollow log, but the second remained missing despite their persistent efforts. Dr. Wright transported Willow and the recovered cub to a rehabilitation center, treating her wounds and malnutrition with promises to release them back into their home territory once healed. 3 weeks passed. Hope for finding the second cub had begun to fade when, during a quiet breakfast on their porch, Sarah noticed movement at the tree line. There stood Willow, her coat restored to its former glossy sheen, with not only her recovered cub, but miraculously, the second one as well, having somehow found its way back to its mother after her release. Emma squealed with delight at the sight. At her sound, Willow took several deliberate steps forward while maintaining a respectful distance. For nearly 10 minutes, the bear family remained at the yard's edge, Willow watching Emma with that same intent gaze from the rescue day. Her presence seemed purposeful, an acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude, showing her reunited family to the child who had recognized her desperation in her darkest moment. News of this extraordinary rescue spread rapidly, transforming from local story to national sensation. Michael's photographs of Emma and Willow became powerful symbols in conservation campaigns. Sarah developed a wildlife protection curriculum that engaged even her youngest students with its message of compassion. The Mason family was forever changed. The careful boundaries they'd maintained between their human world and the wilderness dissolved into something more nuanced, a deeper recognition of the intelligence and emotional lives of the creatures with whom they shared the earth. Emma's unusual affinity for animals remained as she grew, developing into a remarkable empathy no formal education could have provided. Willow and her cubs became regular visitors to the property's edge, always maintaining distance but clearly acknowledging the unusual bond. Even as years passed and cubs eventually established their own territories, Willow remained a guardian presence in their forest, a living reminder of the day when a child's innocent compassion had bridged an ancient divide between human and wild. If this incredible story of compassion across species touched your heart, there are more moments of wonder waiting for you. Subscribe to our channel by clicking the button below and join our community of animal lovers and conservationists. Every day, we bring you remarkable true stories of connection between humans and wildlife that will inspire and move you. Don't miss our upcoming episode about an orphaned elephant who formed an unlikely friendship with a giraffe. Subscribe now and be part of our mission to celebrate and protect the extraordinary bonds that can form between all living creatures.